Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to JWA's Book Talks. I'm Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. So glad to gather with you all today. Please say hello in the chat box. Make sure you're chatting to everyone. We'd love to know who's with us. Let us know who you are and where you are joining us from. And the chat is also where you can add your questions as you have them, and I will try to bring them in later in the program. A few words about JWA for anyone who is new. We are a digital archive that works to transform the way we understand history and Jewish culture by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories. We also pay special attention to how gender functions in the past and present. And we do all of this work because we believe that uncovering a more diverse and nuanced story is going to help us create a better world. So thank you for being our partners in this lately heavy, but also important and meaningful effort. The book talks are just one part of JWA's work, so please, I invite you to check out jwa.org to explore all of the different projects and resources that we offer. I am delighted to introduce this evening's author. Deborah Heiligman is the author of 34 books for children and young adults. Her latest, Loudmouth, Emma Goldman versus America, A Love Story, which has this very beautiful cover as well,
Mhm.
was published in September and is shortlisted for the National Jewish Book Award. It has also won a whole host of other prizes. Her other books include Charles and Emma, The Darwin's Leap of Faith, a National Book Award finalist, among other honors. Vincent and Theo, the Van Gogh brothers, and Torpedoed, the true story of the World War II sinking of the children's ship, both of which won multiple awards. And she is currently working on a book about Margot Frank, which we may ask her about later if we have a chance. Welcome, Deborah. So excited to have you here.
I am so happy to be here. As I keep putting in my posts, my social media posts, I've had a crush on Jewish Women's Archive for years. I use you so much for my research, and I just love getting your emails and the podcast. Can we talk? I just really love you guys. So I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. That is so lovely to hear. Well, I really loved this book, and it certainly feels extremely relevant and timely, and also a real treat to read. Emma Goldman is a true favorite at JWA. She was one of our Women of Valor. She's the subject of one of our posters, which is hanging right behind you, and also
Yes.
hangs in my office over my desk. Um, have you always been an Emma fan? What is your Emma story?
My Emma story is that when I was about 19, a friend of mine from BBYO, B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, Linda, went to Cornell, and Linda met this guy called Don. And Don Herzog was an Emma Goldman fan. And he told me about Emma Goldman, and he was an anarchist. And I thought, oh, I'm not an anarchist, but this lady sounds amazing. And they got married and named their first daughter Emma. Not the only person in my circle who named their child Emma, and I even know an actual Emma Goldman.
Wow.
But so Emma was always in the back of my mind. I thought about her, I read about her, but I didn't do a lot. I didn't know a lot about her. And then when I was thinking about a new book to write, I just written a short book about Clara Lemlich, who I used JWA archive to learn about her, and that was an amazing book to work on. It was for littler kids, but I just did a ton of research, and I thought, oh, I want to write another book about a badass Jewish lady. Who should I write about? And I thought, who else but Emma Goldman? So, and then I tend to write books about subjects I don't know very much about, or sometimes know nothing about, and so then I just start to research, and that's what I did with Emma.
Well, I love the way that you frame the book, that it is both Emma, even just in the title, Emma versus America, a love story, and you have that sort of push-pull of the conflict and then also the deep draw. Can you talk a little bit about that choice to frame it that way?
Yes. I always like to have a through line or a theme for my books, and it takes me a pretty long time to get them, to get the one for each book. Emma was such a larger than life character, and the first thing I did in doing the research was to read Living My Life, her 1,000-page autobiography. And I just take notes and I just started to get to know her. And I was really struck that I was writing another love story. I mean, Charles and Emma's a love story, Vincent and Theo's a love story. I'm writing another love story, but I wasn't 100% sure who the love story was between.
Mhm.
I had three candidates. Was it between Emma and anarchism? Was it between Emma and America? Can you guess who the third one was?
Emma and Sasha.
No, that book was already between Emma and Emma,
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
right? Um, so I toyed with all of them, and in doing my research, I just was struck over and over again by how much she loved America, and even though she was fighting it, fighting the injustices she saw, she really did love America. And so one day I read something in an oral history, which I can tell you about later. It's ended up in the epilogue, and I thought, that's it. I like to read craft books, and I was reading one by Joan Silber, a novelist, and I have it on my wall here. She wrote, it was a little book called The Art of Time in Fiction. So I like to read about like how to set up time in a book. And I was learning about that. And she wrote, meaning is determined by where a story ends. And where I end the story is the meaning of the book. So then I just one day, and I knew I wanted to use the word loudmouth because when she's giving her first big speech that gets her arrested, one of the newspaper reporters calls her loudmouth. I thought, oh, that's a great title. And then
Yeah,
I
great.
got the whole title. And one of my best friends, who's a writer, said when I told her Loudmouth, Emma Goldman versus America, a love story, she said, that title's so good you don't have to write the book. But I did write the book. So I really thought about it a lot, and I came up and I decided the main love story was between her and America.
Yeah, those sort of unrequited, sadly. I would if when you frame it that way, I sort of see it in some ways that way.
I think it was unrequited by the powers that be,
Right.
but she had so many tens of thousands of people who loved her when she was alive and love her whenever they discover her. She's
Yeah.
constantly being
Right. In
rediscovered.
every generation, she kind of
Right,
becomes a figure who
right,
is means something new and different and old and the same, but
right,
at the
right,
same
right,
time.
right, right.
Um, do you want to share a little taste of the book with us?
Sure. Um, I'm just going to read a little bit from the first chapter, which sets it up, and then I'll read the epilogue is very short, and I'll just read a little bit of the epilogue. So, um, the first chapter is called "Take Bread," and it's America, 1893. Emma Goldman was furious. Looking out at the huge crowd before her, she felt their rage too, the collective anger of 5,000 people vibrating in the summer heat. It was August 21st, 1893, Union Square, New York City, a demonstration. Emma Goldman was about to make a speech. She had led 1,000 of these people on a march uptown through the streets of the East Side to this rally. Most of the men and the women were immigrants to America, just like Emma, and most of them were under 25. Emma was 24. Many of them were desperate for food, terrified that soon they would have no money for food. Some were already starving. Looking out at the crowd, Emma could see red banners and flags, symbols for workers' rights and against the government of New York State and the United States of America. Emma didn't hate America, she loved it. But after living here for 7 years, she knew her new country wasn't living up to its ideals. She believed in the goals of the founding fathers, in the promise of America. In the square stood statues of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Marquis de Lafayette. Abraham Lincoln is holding a rolled up document in his hand, thought to be the Emancipation Proclamation. A stone and bronze fence had been built to protect the statue. The fence was inscribed with the words from his second inaugural address, with malice toward none, with charity for all. That was the problem, the all, the reason she stood ready to speak before this crowd of frustrated, fuming workers. Later, Emma remembered starting with these lines. There was some debate about how she started and exactly what she said. There was no video. Anyway, um, men and women, do you realize that the state is the worst enemy you have? It is a machine that crushes you in order to sustain the ruling class, your masters. And then she continued, you have senators and congressmen who live in luxury while you have nothing to eat, Emma said. Their children live in grand style. Their wives and mistresses wear silks and diamonds. She declared that the rich will go on robbing you, your children, and your children's children, unless you wake up, unless you become daring enough to demand your rights. Well, then, and this is what everyone quoted and what got Emma in serious trouble for the first time. Demonstrate before the palaces of the rich, demand work. If they do not give you work, demand bread. If they deny you both, take bread. It is your sacred right. Within a couple of days, the police would catch up to Emma in Philadelphia and she would be arrested for incitement to riot. The police affidavit would describe her as an evil disposed and pernicious person and of turbulent disposition. Emma would not deny that she was stirring things up, but she was doing so for the people of the country whom she loved. So that's the setup. And then the oral history I read was by a young Italian anarchist that she met while she was in exile in Canada. And she helped him not get deported from Canada, and he drove her around to lectures and to do errands and stuff like that. They became good friends. His name was Attilio Bortolatti. One day, Attilio remembered, I took her for a drive around the Detroit River, pointing out the sights. When we were parallel to Belle Isle in the middle of the river, we stopped and I explained what we were seeing. I told her that Belle Isle was famous during the previous century when the Black slaves were brought to Canada on the Underground Railroad. She was very interested in this. She was enthralled just to be near the United States. Attilio saw in his friend's face something he hadn't seen before, love and longing, and he understood then how much America meant to her. Sitting there, her life almost over, she would die the next year. Emma Goldman looked across the water at America as though through the eyes of a lover.
Mm.
That last bit was his quote.
Beautiful. So you mentioned oral history there and the fact that we don't obviously have video of her speeches, so you have to kind of piece it together from different, you know, not totally reliable sources all the time. Tell us
Right.
a little bit about your research process. How did you uh, uncover all the different, there's so many different rich texts and rich descriptions. How did you find the pieces of the story and put it together?
Oh, it was a piece of cake. Um, you asked me before we started how long it took. I'm like, 4 years, 5 years.
Right.
So I started with her autobiography, Living My Life. And what I try to do in the beginning is take notes about things that just make me very excited and that are, I don't write down dates and places and stuff. I just write down my reaction because I want to capture my initial reactions because that's what I'm going to want to give to the reader. So that's what I do. That's what I did. I also read Alexander Berkman's memoir, Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist, which is amazing also. They're both amazing writers. And, Emma was a big writer. So
Hmm.
she wrote a lot. She wrote essays, she wrote speeches. You don't really have that many of her speeches because she spoke mostly extemporaneously. But I try to do as many primary sources as possible. Um, I did discover fairly early on that Emma was not always reliable in terms of remembering stuff correctly. So I always double and triple checked, and you can ask me about the Statue of Liberty.
That is one of my
But
favorite stories about Emma Goldman.
it's so. Should I just tell it?
Yeah, tell that story.
Yeah. So she has a style that is sort of purple, a little bit of purple prose some of the time. And by the way, just a quick aside, she also tells stories that there's no way to know for sure
Right.
whether they're true. Like the night she tried to be a sex worker. I mean, we're taking her word for it.
Right.
But she does kind of write with purple prose, and she's writing her autobiography after she's been kicked out of America, and she's doing it decades after a lot of the things happen. So she writes about being an immigrant, 16 years old, coming into America, standing on deck with her sister Helena, and seeing the Statue of Liberty in all her glory with her torch raised high. And that's in pretty much all the books, many of the books, especially the older books. Something made me look it up. Wait a minute. The Statue of Liberty was not up yet. And so I saw that in print, and I wrote to Ellis Island, to an archivist there, because I love talking to archivists. And I said, "Am I right about this? That it wasn't up yet?" She was here, the statue, but she was in a box, and she wasn't up until the following summer.
Hmm.
So, my first reaction is, "Oh no, what am I going to do?" My second reaction is, "Show your work." So that's very early on in the book. And it's a way, and I tell the story that she says she saw the Statue of Liberty, but she did not. She saw it later on many trips out, in New York and going in and out of the country. But it's my way of getting across that she's not a totally reliable narrator.
Right.
And we can't trust everything that she says. But
And,
there were a
and
lot of, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, it also, I think, speaks to how much, like, the um largeness of America, how big American sort of ideals, or certain American ideals, played for her. She bought into that idea of Lady
Totally,
Liberty, right? Like, she
totally.
really loved that, and she bought into it, and it meant something to her. And in her autobiography, she also describes seeing the Statue of Liberty as she's leaving, being deported,
Right,
right? She
right.
also,
And
so
she
there's
and she
also,
probably could see it
then
then, I
right,
think.
then she very
Yeah.
well might have, because
Right.
it was actually
Right.
there. But
Right.
those become, this symbol of sort of the hope, and then of the
Absolutely.
disillusionment, but still the belief in that as a part of what she part of what she loved about America, part of what she believed America's promise to be.
Right, exactly. And that's why I didn't want to lose it, and I wanted to use it also
Hmm.
for my readers to know. She was so idealistic, and I think when, she didn't hate America, she hated what was happening in it. Does that sound familiar? But yeah, yeah. Um, was there something else you
Well, we were
asked?
talking about research, so you were talking
Oh
about that
yeah.
as an
Oh, I
example
was
of
going to
kind of
say there are a lot of
the
the unreliable
unreliability.
narrative. Yeah, but there were a lot of unreliable narrators at the time.
Sure.
Newspapers were so unreliable. So there are scenes in the book, many scenes in the book, where I cobbled together from what she wrote, what other people wrote, how newspapers covered it, and I just try to kind of show my work that way.
Hmm.
One newspaper said this, another newspaper said that. She said, she hit Johann Most with a horsewhip, which most people agreed that she did. He himself said she never touched him, which I love. But so I just had to cobble it together. Some oral history, not a lot. Um, Although I just talked to somebody the other day whose grandmother served Emma Goldman lunch,
Mm.
and he doesn't know very much about it. So I'm talking to his cousin. Not that I'm rewriting the book, but we're not that far away from her, really. I mean,
Right.
there are people we know who knew people who knew her, right? Knock
Yeah.
over my lamp.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that is I do a lot of primary source, as much primary source research as I can. I don't like to read what other people think about the person that I'm writing about. I like to read it in their words and then come up with my own decision. I mean, there's also like the differences in how they saw things between Sasha and Emma, Alexander Berkman and Emma. And I thought that was fun too. Like their first meeting, one says it was August, one says it was, December or something. So, but that's also typical of their relationship, to be so close and also so combative.
Hmm. Right. And I mean, and it's a reminder that all historical sources are, partial and not totally reliable. And it's good for us to keep that in mind and bring in as many voices as possible. But Emma's such an
Absolutely.
interesting figure in that way too, because she was so much about creating her own myth in some way and kind of the largeness of her character. And I'm curious how how much you felt you came to know her and to, I remember once having a conversation with someone about how because I love Emma and, have learned so much from reading all of her work, or not all of her work, but much of her work. And,
Hmm.
but also some thinking like, would I have enjoyed meeting her, or would I have felt like she was scary and a little bit harsh, or I don't know. I haven't spent
Right.
quite enough time with her to know that. I'm curious if you kind of developed a sense of that for yourself.
I've asked myself that question all the time. Like, um, she, my husband coined this term that we use in our family called a red star,
Hmm.
which is just somebody who's kind of larger than life, and their light emanates all around the room, and you're kind of in their shadow, right? And there are people who are red stars who are likable. There are people who are red stars who are unlikable. There are people who are red stars who deserve to be red stars, and then there are people who do not. Um, I would say that Emma was definitely a red star. I would say she deserved to be a red star. I think she probably had charisma oozing from her
Hmm.
pores, brilliance, just she was so brilliant, so magnetic. Um, I think probably if you're a handsome man, you would find her pretty likable. Um,
Hmm.
especially if she found you, attractive, which she did. I would have loved to have met her. I would have loved to have had meals with her. She loved to cook. I love to cook. I love to eat. She loved to eat. I love to eat. Would we have been best friends? Probably not. But not because I wouldn't have liked her, I don't think. I think I would have liked her, but I don't think I just have a feeling that she would be too much about Emma,
Hmm.
which is okay. It's okay. I'm so glad she was here.
Right.
Um, Working on the book, I had many feelings about her. Like when I was first reading Living My Life, I mean, I would love to, show you my notes, but I just kept saying, Emma, you're being so stupid about men. Why don't break up with him already, Ed Brady? Come on. He
Right.
he fell in love with you because you were this magnetic speaker. Now he wants you to stay home and cook for him. Dump him. I'm just like, she just had made so many bad choices. And there was like one time when I was a little mad at her about something she did with her sister, and then she redeemed herself in my mind. But I had feelings about lots and lots of feelings about her. But oh, would I have loved to have met her?
Yeah.
And you said there's no video. There is a video of the press conference that she had
Hmm.
um, when she came back to America in 1934, I think it was.
Hmm.
And it's worth looking at.
Oh, I will have to track that down. That would be so
Yeah,
cool.
there's somebody just did an interview with me on Substack,
Hmm.
Dashka Slater, who's another young adult writer. And I think she links to that because she asked me to send it to her. So she links to it. If there's another way we can get it,
Okay.
but I think you could find it. It's really amazing to see her. Yeah.
So as you just referenced, this book is intended for young adult readers, and I can imagine that there are things about Emma Goldman, like the concept of anarchism, philosophy of anarchism, that are not so simple to explain. Um,
Mm.
how did you approach this? Like, how do you think about presenting a figure like Emma Goldman to young adults who don't necessarily have the context for the ideologies that she's both, you know, living in and responding to?
Well, so I've been doing this for a long time, and very often people will say to me, like, "Why do you write for kids? This book could be for adults." And I
Yeah, for
say,
sure.
"Yeah, this
It's a
book
great
could be."
read for adults too, for sure.
Um, and that's, I do that on purpose. So I write for kids for three reasons, I think. Although, no, I just lost the third. But the first one is because books meant so much to me as a kid. And I really, truly believe that a book can change a kid's life, really could change a kid's life. And um, I, I love that audience. I love being able to tell, a story to them. Um, I think writing for that audience gives me the permission to tell the story that I want to tell
Hmm.
and not get too hung up in the weeds. Like if I were writing this for adults, I would have gone much more into the various theories of anarchism.
Right.
And I don't necessarily want to do that. And I don't think kids necessarily want to read that. I mean, the kid who wants to read that will totally find that on her own. Um, but I also want adults to read my books, and I find that I get adults reading the books. Like one of the very first, fan mails I got for Vincent and Theo about Vincent Van Gogh was a guy, a retired sheriff, and he writes me this whole email. He said, "I didn't realize it was for young adults until I was finished with it. I hope it's okay I read it because I'm not a young adult, I'm an old adult." And I said, it's really okay, but I believe that you can write anything for kids. I think you just have to know what they don't know.
Hmm.
So, I edited what I read from the first chapter, just a little bit because I'm assuming I have more adults on here than teens, and I edited out a couple things that were context, but
Hmm.
I slipped the context in just so a kid doesn't go, "Wait, what's the Emancipation Proclamation?"
Hmm.
Right?
Right.
Or, who was the Marquis de Lafayette? Right. So I slipped that in. How much to talk about the different kinds of anarchism, to me, that was just a little bit, like a
Hmm.
little bit here and a little bit there. Um, Interestingly, I won't name names, but one review, um, not a big journal or anything like that, but said something like, "Well, there are a lot of things in this book that really aren't suitable for children."
Hmm.
And I thought, well, they're not children actually; they're teenagers. And there's a thing in publishing where if you put 14 and up on a book, when you put it in wherever you put it in the data, you can write about anything.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting.
but I was concerned. Because she does get raped and there is torture in the book, and she does spend a night trying to be a sex worker, failing, but trying, according to her. And so we have a content warning at the beginning of the book,
Hmm.
which honestly, maybe this will, be not, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I had so much fun writing the content warning because I've never had to write a content warning before.
Hmm.
But I was serious, like really serious. Like I didn't want somebody to open this book and not be warned that they might be triggered by rape or torture or child abuse. I mean, there's also a lot of the reviews mentioned the child abuse
Right.
in her childhood. Um, so I would say that I tend to, if anybody out there wants to write for kids or teens, I tend to just write for myself at that age.
Hmm.
And I can access that person, and I am that person still very much. So that's who I write for. It won't be for every kid. Not every kid wants to read about Emma Goldman. I wish they would. Maybe more will.
Well, and it's so interesting to think about like what are the things that people would think are not appropriate for kids. I mean, hello, first of all, the news cycle is like
Yeah,
so much
right,
worse than anything else
right,
that one could
right.
read. Um, but you could imagine at some people would be like, oh, well, free love, that's the problem here. Other people would be like, well, she advocated violence. In some ways, I feel like that might be the hardest part to explain why she could still be laudable and also, you know, advocate
Yeah,
violence in certain circumstances. So how, I mean, you try to couch that in various places and try to explain
right.
both her ambivalence about it in some ways or why she felt in certain cases it was okay. Was that one of the things that felt like a hard piece to contextualize?
Yes, very much so. I had a couple of things that I kept going over and over. How was I going to deal with it? And that was one of them because I am essentially a pacifist, and I don't really believe that violence is the way. And yet I was kind of rooting for them with Frick. I was kind of like, you go. And I had to stop myself. Like I was very into writing the scene, and then he got the suit, and then he got the fake business cards, and he had the pistol, and and then he's going into the office, and even though I know what happens, that he spoiler alert, he doesn't kill Henry Clay Frick. But I think I have a line in there that says something like, actually, they were planning to commit a murder.
Right.
And this is not funny. This is not for entertainment. This is serious business. And then when the United Healthcare exec was shot down, my friend Alex Kate Shulman and I both immediately thought of the Frick attentat. It really, really reminded us of that, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But I really, really thought about it a lot. Um, and I talk to people. I walk my dog every morning in Riverside Park, and the most amazing place if you want to learn anything. And I got to be friends with a woman called Tracy, who ended up becoming my sensitivity reader for the race issue,
Mm-hmm.
as she calls herself, my angry Black woman reader. So, and we talked a lot about violence in society, and then so I had two outside readers read the book in addition to my family and my editor, you know, and one of them was her, and the other one was a historian called Ty Jones, who's at Columbia, and he told me I was soft pedaling Emma's violent leanings. And so what you see is me dealing with that. I think I was shying away from it, and I leaned back into it
Mm-hmm.
because even though, I'm not Emma, even though I don't believe that violence is the way. And she, as you say, she walked it back towards the end of her life. I thought it was really pretty funny that, there's a scene early in the book where she horse rips her mentor and her lover, Johann Most. And a lot of people I know are very upset by that scene, just that she did it, not that I wrote it. And I thought it was, that was one of the things she really regretted,
Mm-hmm.
that she did that. She said, I was young, I had other things on my mind, I really shouldn't have done that. So yeah, that was a big worry I had. I spent a lot of time worrying about the violence.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting also, one of the things that you get from someone like Emma who lives a very long life in which she is active at like every part of her life. So it's not, some
Yeah,
people live a very long life, but their period of being public figures engaged and stuff is short. And so you don't really know
right,
what they thought later because they don't necessarily leave records for that. But as
right,
somebody who was outspoken and public through so many decades, you actually do get to see her, her, I don't want to say evolution exactly, but sort of her changing perspective on these things. And and her ambivalence, or how she is able to frame things at different times in different ways. And I think just from a sort of pedagogical perspective, that's actually very helpful to see, right? Like I think,
right,
especially when you're writing for young people, to be able to show them, like, first of all, people make mistakes and then they admit it and they regret it and they apologize, or they don't apologize maybe in time, but they then live with that, knowing that they didn't
right,
do that. And also that people change their minds, and that's part of like human experience, and part of like development and growth. You wouldn't want
right,
someone to be so static that they never were able to ever reflect differently on something that they once said or believed.
right, right. And one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about that was her feelings about her father. I
Hmm.
mean, her father was physically abusive to her and emotionally abusive to her. He is not the one who raped her. That was a boy, a young man. Um, but her father, um, they butted heads. Oh my God. Can you imagine what that house must have, their arguments must have sounded like?
Yeah.
But later on, she says, I realized he was an oppressed person.
Hmm.
He was stymied in every part of his life. He was in a loveless marriage. He didn't get to do the work he wanted to do. He was, in Russia, he was, just limited because he was Jewish. In America, he was limited because he was an immigrant. And she made peace with him and her mother, who she had trouble with too, by the end of her life. And even by the end of their lives. And I found that really moving. My editor is
Hmm.
Joy Peskin, and I love it when people like have their own things that they want to know about. When I turned in the draft, and in subsequent drafts, she kept saying, but what does her family think of her doing this? What does her family think of her saying this and saying that? And it was interesting. I mean, sometimes I didn't know that much because she didn't really talk that much about it. But, her mother ended up being extremely proud of her at the end, even though she was so like she couldn't believe what she was doing a lot of the time. But at the end, when somebody tried to shut her mother up, was giving a speech, and her mother said they told her to stop speaking, and her mother said, "The U.S. government can't shut up my daughter Emma Goldman. You're not going to shut me up."
Right, that's
But
an amazing story.
yeah, yeah. But
And
I do love the evolution of her thought as she
yeah.
got older. Yeah,
Right. And the piece with her parents, not only that she's able to then have, kind of have compassion for them, but that they come around also and come to feel proud of her. That was very moving to me as
right,
well. Because there are
right,
a lot of people who do a lot of work to be okay with their parent, to come to forgive or understand their parents, but they don't always get that, either have the
right,
opportunity to or actually have that experience of the parents kind of coming around too. And it was interesting to think of how just as she was able to kind of use her theoretical, you know, her theoretical understanding of the world and different kinds of power dynamics to understand her parents, that they also seemed to recognize that some of their own frustrations were things that she was able to kind of live out in a different way. She was able to respond to that and recognize that she wanted to make different choices for herself, and that they could kind of um, experience that, sort of, they didn't get to have those exact experiences, but they could appreciate that through her experience.
right, right, right. Yeah.
How did you think about Emma's relationship to her Jewishness, or kind of the Jewish elements of Emma's story? I think because um, because she's an anarchist, and obviously anarchists are not super gung ho about religion as a positive force. I think people often assume like, oh, well, she just kind of renounced her Jewishness, but I don't think that's not the full story. So how did you think about that piece of her story?
I did think about it, and I've been thinking about it more and more, actually. Sometimes, after you write a book, you think about it more and what, like what writing the book meant to you and what being spending so much time with the person meant to you. Um, I think that she was very sort of culturally Jewish,
Hmm.
um, ethnically Jewish. She cooked Jewish food. She she very much identified as a Jewish woman. Um, she was not religious. I mean, this is a person who had a ball in Yom Kippur. Kind of
Right.
to as a little bit of an fu. But I think
Well,
she
it's an FU, but it's also like not just forgetting about Yom Kippur. It's like staying
right,
engaged in it, right? Like it's
right,
creating an alternative practice that is certainly anti-traditional, but it's not saying like, oh, I don't even know what day Yom Kippur is. It's saying I
right.
actually like totally know, and I'm going to actually plan a Yom Kippur event. It's just going to be the opposite of what I'm supposed to be doing on Yom Kippur.
Exactly, exactly. I hadn't thought about it that way. That's really, really true. Yes, of course. She's not just saying let's have a ball on Christmas. She's
Right.
saying let's have a ball on Yom Kippur. I think she's the embodiment of Tikkun Olam.
Hmm.
I think she is all about repairing the world. I mean, she is the person who says over and over again, think. Think about what's going on around you. Notice what's going on around you and try to fix it. And to me, there can't be anything. I mean, not to have a competition, but that's very Jewish. I was going to say there couldn't be anything more Jewish, but I mean, I feel that I was a religious studies major in college, a Jewish, with specializing in Jewish studies, and it kind of made me less religious rather than more religious, and yet then again, very identified with being Jewish and being Jewish in a very specific kind of a way for me. And I think that's the same with Emma. I think she's all about social justice and all about repairing the world and all about living in the now and not thinking about what happens after what
Right.
happens after you die. And so I think of her as a very Jewish person, a very Jewish woman. And I think she would agree. I think she would agree. I mean, she certainly wasn't any other religion, you know.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really moved by in her autobiography is how she talks about sort of, identifying with the biblical character of Judith and seeing herself
Yes.
in that tradition of the kind of bold woman who, when no one can figure out how to save her people, steps up in this very powerful, very like stepping into the breach when there's no leadership, and
Right.
in a fairly violent way, cutting off the head of the general, right?
Yeah, right.
So that it fits that piece as well. There and in a very dramatic way. It certainly is like a story of
Right.
drama, um, but it's also like she's claiming a biblical story for herself. That story is actually not really in the Jewish canon exactly, but it is actually a Hanukkah story as well. So there,
Right.
to me, I was sort of like, oh, that's very interesting that she kind of puts herself, that's the lineage that she claims for herself Jewishly.
It's funny. I'm sure you're right about that. In my mind, she also identifies with Deborah, but I don't
Hmm.
know. Maybe there's a whole Judith Deborah thing going on here. But
Right.
you know, I think she mentioned. Now I'll have to search, but I think she might mention Deborah as the judge, and
Hmm.
maybe that wasn't in Living My Life, but somewhere else in one of her
Hmm.
essays or something. But yeah, I do think that she would be, how she would be feeling politically now about everything. I think we probably know, but I think she was very Jewish in her in the social justice kind of way, and in the powerful taking charge.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, what is it like publishing this book in this particular moment where there are so many, Emma Goldman is deported. She is there's so many free speech moment. I mean, she's really fighting for free speech and she's being silenced in so many ways. There's so many things that come up in her language that feel like they could be quoted in the paper today.
Oh, yeah. You know, I keep thinking about the immigrant part. I keep thinking about how Emma was an immigrant and she noticed right away what that meant here in this country, how hard it was to be an immigrant, how people who came here before you, she called people who had been here for generations the natives. Okay. But we knew what she meant. She meant people who had been here longer than her. The othering of immigrants was so strong back then.
Hmm.
Just her first moments in Castle Garden, because Ellis Island, for those who haven't read the book, Ellis Island wasn't there yet, but Castle Garden was a hot mess. And people talked about how it smelled bad because of all the immigrants' disgusting food, the Limburger cheese and stuff like that. And, you know, it's interesting to me to have published this book at this time because I keep, my dream is that people will read it, young people and their people will read it and be inspired to speak out the way Emma did. Um, it's astonishing to me how many parallels. You just sent out an email from JWA saying history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. It's rhyming like heck right now, with the threatening deportations, people rounding up off the street. I'm starting to walk around my neighborhood to notice things because I'm in a neighborhood with a lot of immigrants, and I want to make sure nobody does anything to them. You know, this was, the government was after Emma for 3 decades to kick her out. Emma and her people, but mostly Emma. And she just kept going. And I just keep thinking about that, how she was this immigrant, so many immigrants at that time and today, they just want to make a good life for themselves. They come here because they're being oppressed in their country, they're going to be murdered in their country, they have no way to make a living in their country, and they come here and things are not what they seem. The work is hard, the hours are long, the pay is poor, the housing is bad, it's hard to get food, all of that. And most people just keep trying and they keep their head down and they don't make trouble. And then you have the few, like Clara Lemlich, like Emma Goldman, you have them just, and many other people, but you have them speaking out. And today I feel like what we're seeing in Minneapolis, what we're seeing all over the place is really, in some ways, an example of the ideal of anarchism.
Mm.
I mean, people don't really understand what anarchism means. People think anarchism means chaos. It does not mean chaos. It means without a leader.
Right.
Seems like a good idea right now. Um, but what it really means, and what the kind of anarchism that Emma loved, was the mutual aid. Her ideal was that I'm not saying this is like doable or even necessarily logical, but her idea was we get rid of the government, the white patriarchy, the government from the top down. If you get rid of all the government, that what will naturally happen is people will start taking care of each other
Mm-hmm.
in small communities, the mutual aid stuff that's happening, in the Twin Cities right now.
Yeah.
What we're doing right now here in New York, groups are gathering and they're saying, how can we help our neighbors? We're
Yeah.
having, this is what, this is the ideal. So
Yeah.
there's so many things about her and this book that are right for this time. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, I mean, I was really struck by how, as I was reading your book, it made me think about anarchism a little bit differently to see it put in quite those terms, because I think often there's a sense that anarchism comes out of a kind of cynicism, like the government can never work. It's impossible for government to work, right? But actually, what she's saying is it comes out of this incredible optimism about humanity, that like human
Yeah.
people are so fundamentally good that we actually don't need all of these systems, because our true natures will emerge when we get rid of the broken systems, and it will run more smoothly. And that is remarkably optimistic. I mean,
Right.
that is a very, very hopeful view of how humanity is. And I don't think people necessarily think about Emma Goldman as optimistic in quite that way. Although one of the things that I was also thinking about her that I think is particularly resonant right now is her insistence on joy needing to be part of resistance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, that's something that I think is very live right now, just a recognition that like we are only going to get through all of this if we can figure out
Right.
how to, I mean, in Emma's terms, we would say dance, right? Or have flowers
Right.
or whatever the things
Right.
are that
Right.
were
Right.
kind of her touchstones. But that idea that like if we can't have that touchstone of beauty and connection and pleasure, we are not going to be able to survive this. So
Right.
we can't
Right.
really make change if we are heads down in the trenches all the time. We have to have room to breathe and to
Right.
nurture ourselves in all these different ways. And that feels like something that I think is probably particularly resonant now, also with young people who are
Right.
good at reminding us of that.
About, yes, about singing and dancing and having
Yeah.
fun with your friends and all of that.
Yeah.
And just to go back to something that you said, one of the things I struggled with writing the book was, do I believe people are good at heart?
Hmm.
Like good, basically good. Um, I don't know. I don't know. Some days I do and some days I don't. But
Hmm.
when I see people doing what we're talking about, and telling each other to have joy and being there for each other and fighting for the oppressed, I do believe that they are. I mean, she called anarchism her beautiful ideal.
Hmm.
Um, and Yeah, and I think that she would want us to keep fighting, and she would also want us to have fun. Although she never really said in so many words, if I can't dance, it's not my revolution. She did love to dance,
Yeah,
and she
that's
loved flowers, and she loved good food, and she loved men. And we didn't even get to talk about that.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And somebody asked in the chat, who do I think is like Emma Goldman
right, I
right
was about to
now?
ask that.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. Greta Thunberg was the only person who came to mind while I was
Mhm.
working on the book. She was the one who kept coming to mind. She's been kind of quiet lately, but because she's working outside the system. I think you have to try to think of who's working outside the system, not who's in the government necessarily, because I think that that is more like the Emma. But I'd be curious to know if I'd be curious to know if anybody else can think of anybody who's like Emma. Maybe we're
Mhm.
waiting for our next Emma.
Yeah.
Maybe some 24-year-old is going to read this book and go, hey,
Right.
I'm going to
Someone
do
who's
that
just
now.
arriving on our shores right now could be the next Emma.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
Um, So your book is, and you mentioned her already just in passing for one moment, but I noticed that one of the people your book is dedicated to is the writer Alice Kate Shulman, who herself has written about Emma Goldman and who is
Yeah.
a hero of ours at JWA, and I think might actually be in the room with us tonight.
I
I
hope
think I saw
so.
her when I was glancing at our yes, in our participants list. Um, so first of all, thrilled to have her here. Can you say a little bit about the role Alex played for you in this book and your connection to her?
I certainly will. Let me just say the book is dedicated to three people. The other two, um, Katie Walsh and Sarah Zinger, are my daughters-in-law, and who are both loudmouths in their own way. And Alex Kate Schulman is a fabulous person. I met her through Emma because someone knew that I was writing a book about Emma and said, would you like to meet Alex Kate Schulman? And I said, what? Because I had read Emma Speaks, which is a book that she had put together of Emma's writings before anybody else was doing that. And she actually, and I didn't know it until after I had that book, she had written her very first book was a young adult biography of Emma Goldman 50 some years ago. So I emailed her and we met and during the pandemic, and we took a walk with our masks on and we started talking, and um, she's now one of my closest friends. She's just an amazing human, and I love her so much. and um, um, and she's changed my life, and that's what I say. And she's changed my life because she just knows how to live, and she knows how to just look at the world with such wonder and beauty. And she's so strong, and she's so opinionated, and you know, I think if I had a dinner party and we could, if we could have Emma and Alex and me and whoever else wants to come, I think we would just have the best time. But Alex has to be there.
Well, I would love to
Absolutely.
be at that one too. And
You're
put
invited.
we put the link to our encyclopedia article about Alex Kate Shulman into in the chat there. Um, that is great. And I think that that sense of like the different generations of loudmouthness that we pass on and that we learn from and that can help us find our way is a beautiful part of this story.
When I was writing the book, I got really down at one point because just somebody had a question about
Right,
feminism, but
feminism. Yeah, we'll get to that.
yeah. Um, because I was starting to ask people, do you know who Emma Goldman was? And I was surprised at how many people didn't know who she was.
Hmm,
I thought everybody knew who Emma Goldman was.
right.
And I said to Alex one day, I just feel terrible because I don't know, people don't know who she was, and maybe I shouldn't be writing about her, typical writer angst. And Alex said, they don't know about her because she was a woman, and nobody, they don't remember the women.
Right.
Um,
And
and
she was
and that's
complicated. You can't put her in a box. It's much
you
harder
can't
to
put her in a
tell
box.
people's story when when they're involved in
Yeah.
like every issue.
Right. They say, well, what did she do? My editor said to me, can you give me a one liner? I'm like, yeah, not really.
Yeah,
I mean, she
exactly.
spoke for women's rights. I mean, somebody just asked in the chat,
Right.
can I talk about her feminism? She was an ardent feminist, but she didn't believe in the woman's right to vote. Okay. So explain that, Deb. Okay. Because she didn't believe in government. So she didn't believe in voting,
Right.
but also because she was worried that if they concentrated just on the right to vote, they would not get all the other things that women needed. And she wanted women to just be totally equal. So anybody who says she wasn't a feminist, in my humble opinion, is wrong. Um,
Right. She
uh,
was more focused on like the issues with marriage and, all the different ways that women were
in their
constrained
daily,
that went beyond having the right to vote and being able to
right,
make
right.
legislative change.
I mean, she wanted women to be able to work whatever jobs they wanted to work, sleep with whomever they wanted to sleep with, own land, just do everything. And she was right about that. I don't know that I agree with her. I think women, as long as men are voting, women should vote too. But that was her thing. So yes, I believe she was a feminist through and through. Um,
Um, what was the most surprising thing you discovered in writing this book?
hmm. I think that really it was her men thing, like that she just
Mm-hmm.
was not so good with choosing men. Although the more I thought about it, the less surprised I was because she did not have a good role model, and her father and her parents' marriage was terrible, and so she really did, you know, kind of not have her head on or her body on straight about it. Although I have to say, there she is in her late 60s sleeping with a 35-year-old man. I mean, she really did have a lot of, she kind of had a lot of fun. And he was, this is such a great story. I mean, he was blind. And so the only way they could communicate was for his wife to read the letters that they were writing back and forth, which were very sexy. So I mean, by then I wasn't so surprised, but by the
Right.
time I got to that part in her life, but yeah, I think that was the thing that surprised me the most.
Yeah, it makes her very human. You sort of it's a good reminder that no matter how brilliant someone is, they can't think themselves out of the context that they live in, and humans are human and imperfect.
Right,
And in some ways, I feel like knowing that there was something that Emma was not brilliant about is like it brings her down to earth a little bit as someone who's a little bit more to me at least, a little more
right,
relatable. Not that I
right,
relate to her and her relationships exactly, but the idea that she could be, you know, she didn't have it all figured out, really.
right. I also was surprised and disappointed with her and race.
Hmm.
Although I think she did grow in that, as you were talking about, she did grow in that respect too, but she was a person of her time, and she could have been better on race even
Hmm.
for her time. But again, she did grow with that. That was
Hmm.
more of I would say, that of a disappointment than a surprise, really.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Um, Well, we don't have time to hear about your next project about Margot Frank, so we're just going to have to, when that book comes out, we'll have to invite you back to talk about that. And that connects back to Laura's question about the quote about people are good at heart, which of course is an Anne Frank quote. Um, so we wish you luck on that project. But most of all, just want to
Thank
thank
you.
you for writing this book and for sharing it with us tonight and sharing Emma with us. And thanks to all of you for being here for this
Thank you, everybody, for
conversation.
coming.
I
And
really, really hope that we can take Emma's energy and vision and her refusal to take no for an answer and her optimism about humanity and bring that into the world that we are living in. Um, we have so much more to share about Emma on our site. We just put a whole bunch of links into the chat. We have so much information on Emma in our Encyclopedia of Jewish Women, in
mhm.
our Women of Valor exhibit, in our This Week in History collection. You can also learn more about Jewish women anarchists in our encyclopedia. For a while, JWA actually had an advice column that was written by Emma Goldman. Um,
Wow.
that is so much fun. You can check that out. And we have lots of pieces about Emma on our blog. We linked to a couple there that were written by our Teen Rising Voices fellows. Um, and
And you have an Emma Goldman tote bag raffle thing happening.
yes. Oh my gosh, right. We have a raffle that we did for Jewish Justice Giving Day, but our tote bags and our Emma Goldman t-shirts and sweatshirts and other things are purchasable at our shop. I forgot to even put that link in, but Mickey's got it for me and just dropped that in there. And of
Excellent.
course, our Emma Goldman poster also. Um, a couple other things I want to share. Applications. I don't know if you can all hear my dog freaking out because someone's on my porch. Um, Applications for the next cohort of our Rising Voices Fellowship are now open. So if you know a teen entering grades 10 to 12 who is interested in exploring feminism, Judaism, and social justice through writing, please encourage them to apply. The deadline is March 31st. And this sadly is the last book talk of this series, but we have lots more programs coming soon. Our next series, which begins in March, is an online history course called Unruly Visions, A Century of Jewish Women Artists. It is co-sponsored by Central Synagogue. It begins Thursday, March 5th, and you can find more info and the link to register at jwa.org/events. You have to scroll down a little bit to find that. But until next time, everyone, thank you. Take care of yourselves. Let's take care of each other, and sending everybody off with a wishes for a good night.
Good night, everybody. Love you all.
Thank you so much, Deborah.
Thank you so much.